Chapter 771, Goodbye 1. The atmosphere froze over. It was almost as if time itself had stopped. The shift was noticeable as Delilah's gaze slowly turned in my direction. Her eyes, which had previously warmed up, suddenly turned different. It made my heart freeze, but I knew that I couldn't let that affect me. I had to come clean. Not just because I wanted to, but because I had to. For my future. If I were. It's not funny. Delilah cut me off, her body moving slightly away from me. I didn't pursue her and just kept my gaze on her as she moved several steps back while keeping her gaze on me. This is not funny, she repeated. The only thing I could do was smile at her. I know it isn't. Her eyes trembled for a moment, her eyes frosting over. I didn't pay any mind to it and just shifted my attention towards the distant moon. I'm sure you suspected that something has been wrong with me for quite some time now. You never said anything after some point, but you've always kept close tabs on me. I know that. Stop. I'm sure you're also aware of the fact that this isn't my true body. That I'm an external soul that has entered and taken over the entity known as Julian Dacre Evanis. You've probably figured it out a while back, but just never said anything about it. I could tell. This had most likely happened during the time when my body had been possessed by Julian at the academy following the Pope incident. I had sensed a subtle change in her, but it wasn't obvious. It was clear to me now that this was most likely the moment she first realized the truth. It hasn't been long since I found out the truth myself. Probably a couple of years by now. I wanted to tell you, but I cracked a smile, placing my hands onto the handrail and leaning back. I wasn't so sure it was a good idea, considering the state you had been in not long ago. With your hatred for the gods and everything they had done to you, it seemed more than justified. It truly did. I wouldn't blame you for wanting to kill all of the gods. I had been trying to do that myself. I forced out a laugh and shifted my gaze back to Delilah, who stood motionless in the moonlight, her hair stirring in the breeze, her eyes fixed intently on me. She didn't say a word. Nothing. She just stared at me with her cold black eyes. I couldn't tell what she was thinking, but I was prepared for anything. Even if she tried to kill me on the spot, I was ready for it. I had gone through all the simulations in my mind and realized that I had no choice but to tell her the truth. I also realized why, up until now, Cithras had been keeping her alive. While he may say that he's discarded her, he still holds on to the hope that something might change in the future. His absolute trust in his strength was what made him dismiss her strength. In some sort of way, Delilah was a key to hurting the outer beings. Did you know? Delilah's voice broke in before I had the chance to say anything. It sounded steady, and yet, beneath the calmness, I caught the faint trembling that she tried so hard to disguise in her tone. Did you know about what happened to me? To that, I wasn't able to respond. Did I know? To some extent. However, I didn't know the details. I had only just learned it recently. To some extent, a terrifying pressure suddenly enveloped the surroundings. It was so powerful that for a moment, I almost completely forgot how to breathe. If not for the fact that Delilah wasn't trying to kill me, I'd have probably died on the spot. You know, I opened my mouth, trying my best to say something to de-escalate the situation, but in the end, I nodded my head. Yes. Delilah's face twisted, and for the first time, I saw an expression that was truly filled with hatred. My heart seemed to stop, and the world around me fell into complete stillness. And yet, despite how the situation was turning out to be, I didn't panic. I knew that I didn't have to panic. I was quickly proven right as Delilah's face continued to change, switching from hatred to confusion to sadness, and then silence. In the end, she just stopped moving. I knew that this was my time to speak. I only found out recently. Back in the mirror dimension, when I talked with Panthea. Delilah's head twitched. She had most likely been aware of Panthea's presence back in the mirror dimension, or at least had an inkling. She didn't explicitly tell me that it was you, but it wasn't hard to figure out. She's also not aware of my true identity since I never revealed it to her, nor did I have the necessary means to be recognized as Oricleus. I had been thinking about it for quite some time. About the reason I had to die and give my blood away. While one of the reasons was because of Cithras, another one was probably so that I wouldn't arouse any suspicion from Panthea. About my real identity and my goal. It had all been especially planned in advance so that it wouldn't happen. If I'm not the traitor, and the same is true for Noel, then this makes sense. This was probably done in order to remain cautious against the other gods. There's no one that I can trust amongst the 6 others besides Noel. But these were all thoughts for later. Right now, there was nothing more important than the woman in front of me as I took a step forward. However, the moment I did, Delilah stepped back. She shook her head, and my hands dropped. I opened my mouth, ready to say something, but Delilah beat me to it. Is this what you meant before? About it being hard to be with you. Ah, I opened my mouth, closing it a moment later before eventually nodding. Yes, this was exactly why I said what I did. Being with me wasn't going to be easy. In fact, it would probably be incredibly hard. There's a lot weighing on me right now. A part of my past has caught up with me. One I can't avoid, even if I tried. What do you mean? I smiled at Delilah, or at least, tried to smile. Despite my best efforts to reassure her, all that came out was a poor excuse for comfort. I'll be leaving soon. Leaving. Delilah's face changed. Her previously tense expression faded, and in its place was a worried one. Where are you going? For how long are you going? Her voice grew quicker with each question she asked, seemingly understanding that the reason why I was saying all of this wasn't just because I wanted to come clean, but rather, because I was going to say goodbye to her. You're not going to. Delilah stopped, biting her lips forcefully as her cold exterior began to fade. You're not going to. I'm not going to die. I reassured her with a smile. This time, the smile was a lot more genuine. I'll just be gone for quite some time. How long? I don't know. Probably a while. How long is a while? A year, 2 years, maybe more. I didn't know myself. I'd hope for it to be less, but I wasn't sure. This was something that I couldn't escape. No, this was more like fate. This was something that I had to do regardless of my will. That long. I nodded, and the surroundings fell into a sudden silence. Delilah stood completely still, her expression turning distant, almost numb. I watched her for a moment, then took a step forward. This time, unlike before, she didn't move. I took another step, drawing closer to her. And then another, and then. I stood right before her, wrapping my hands around her body and bringing her closer to mine. She didn't resist, and that was all I needed. In some way, this was her way of showing she was willing to wait. As I pulled her close, holding her tightly, trying to memorize the feeling, Delilah's soft voice whispered in my ear. You're selfish. I paused, unsure of how to reply. But then, I nodded. I am. You're a liar. I am. You're. Her body trembled, her arms moving as they clung to my back, squeezing just as hard as I did. I reciprocated her actions, bringing her body closer to me as I felt my chest squeeze. Not from joy, but from pain. I didn't want to go. I didn't want to leave her. Not when we had just established our relationship. But I had to. This right here was our goodbye. As I pulled my head back, our eyes met for the last time, and moments later, our lips found each other once more. We fell into the pleasure for one last time. Clank. Delilah closed the door quietly behind her and stood still, unmoving. Her face was cold, drained of any emotion, while her eyes flickered with something unreadable. It hadn't been long since Julian left, but with every passing minute, she felt her emotions slipping further away, fading into a cold emptiness. Her body trembled, and she understood exactly what was happening. I'm about to reach the zenith. The barrier that had been blocking her path for so long had started to break. Taking a few steps into the room, Delilah paused. For a brief moment, her heart clenched. A flood of memories surged back, overwhelming her and settling into her chest as she trembled. In truth, she still had a hard time accepting Julian's words. She didn't want to believe his words. How could he be Oricleus? A student, someone she had seen for the past years. The man who had managed to conquer her heart. But the more she thought about it, the more the possibility seemed real. Slowly, the dots began to connect, shedding light on so many of his past actions. In those last moments between the two of them, he had tried to explain a bit about his past, but Delilah stopped him before he could continue. She still wasn't ready to hear it. Not yet, not in her current state, as she clutched her chest, her face growing paler with each passing second. Despite her best attempts at trying to hold the pain back, she wasn't able to as she covered her mouth with her trembling hand. No, it's not his fault. He didn't lie to me. Delilah mumbled in her mind, stumbling forward. Even if he is, it's clear that he's not the one who did it. He's a liar, but he had good reason not to tell. I can just kill the other ones. I don't have to kill him. I can. The trembling of Delilah's hands intensified as her eyes grew moist. An overwhelming sense of pain and guilt settled in her chest as she stumbled towards her bed, and warm streaks fell down the side of her cheeks. Her chest trembled. She, too, hadn't been honest. Her hatred for the gods didn't just stem from the fact that she hated them for what they had done to her. No, truth was, their death meant her survival. She couldn't live unless they all died. For that reason, they needed to die. Chapter 772, Goodbye 2. Following the announcement and the reveal of the fiancé, the party carried on, but the atmosphere had shifted. Conversations continued, laughter echoed, and music played, yet a subtle tension lingered, threading through the guests as if the room itself had taken note of the change. The tension wasn't very high, but there was a clear divide as a noticeable shift occurred among the guests. If the prince's faction held a slight advantage moments prior, that was no longer the case, as a clear shift had occurred in the succession battle. With Julian officially becoming the son-in-law of the Rosenberg household, and in turn gaining the allegiance of the current head of Central and the strongest duchy around, the momentum had shifted entirely to Aoife's side. "I wish you the best, princess." "Thank you. That's very kind of you." The nobles who had been undecided just moments before now clustered around her, striking up conversations as she responded with a carefully measured smile. "Of course, I remember you. It was back in the Noctur party, correct?" "Yes, I remember the conversation that we had, leaving a deep impression on me." Aoife was rather eloquent. Having practiced seriously, she knew how to handle all of the guests, even going as far as spending the previous week just memorizing all of the guests present and recalling any interactions she had with them in the past. "I wish we could continue the conversation we had last time." "It would be my pleasure." It was her eloquence that turned the mood upbeat, her reputation growing within the factions. The flow continued for several hours, the mingling and forced smiles persisting, until the party finally drew to a close. Aoife took her chance to slip away, moving further back where Kira and Evelyn were waiting. "I think my jaw is stuck," Aoife mumbled, massaging her jaw. "I think my stomach is about to leave my body." Kira replied not long after, her voice hoarse while she held onto her stomach. "Just thinking about your face, and that forced smile of yours." "That's mean." Slap. Evelyn suddenly interjected, lightly slapping Kira's back. "Oi, stop." Aoife stopped the two before the situation escalated. Knowing the two of them, they very well could start a fight over something as light as this. Brushing her hair back, she looked around. "It's a good thing that the party is coming to an end. I honestly couldn't take it any longer." She honestly felt quite beat. While she had gotten used to putting on a face when talking with the other nobles, it was still tiring. She would much rather be with Kira and Evelyn. At the very least, she didn't need to talk in circles with them. But putting everything aside, her mind couldn't help but drift toward the cause of everything. "I can't believe this actually happened. When did it even start?" She was just as stunned as everyone else had been at the revelation. It was just that she had to snap out of it rather quickly, as she had to take advantage of the situation presented to her. However, now that everything had settled and the reality of the situation had fully registered, the shock finally surfaced in her heart, sending ripples of unease through it. "Don't you guys find it odd?" Aoife looked at Kira and Evelyn. "How did Julian end up with the Chancellor? I don't think I've ever seen the two of them talk much." "Wasn't he her assistant, though?" Evelyn interjected, tilting her head. "From what I remember, he was her assistant for quite some time. They may have developed some sort of relationship then." "You think so?" Aoife mumbled, still struggling to accept the explanation. It simply didn't make sense to her. Everyone knew the Chancellor. She was a cold and untouchable figure. Someone almost no one could ever hope to reach. From her strength, which had no rival, to her beauty, which even Aoife had to admit was on another level. And yet, Julian had somehow gotten engaged to that very same woman. Was it truly because he was her assistant? Actually, as if suddenly recalling something, Evelyn's face turned strange. "What is it?" Kira asked, growing somewhat curious at Evelyn's suspicious behavior. Biting her lips, Evelyn's expression changed a couple of times, struggling to bring herself to speak. It took Kira's sharp words to make her speak as she mumbled, "Fine. Fine." Looking up at Aoife, she explained, "There was an accident that happened a while back. It was during the time that I went to visit the estate with my father. Julian and I both feared that we'd get engaged together, so Julian randomly said he'd like to marry Delilah. It was supposed to be an exaggeration for the sake of the moment, but who would have thought that?" Evelyn stopped there, her expression turning even more complex. The more she thought about the situation, the weirder it felt to her. "You serious?" Kira looked at Evelyn with her jaw slack, prompting Evelyn to nod her head. The Duke was also there. Julian wasn't aware of his identity back then. What? Huh? Kira and Aoife both made odd faces, but soon Kira's expression started to twist, the situation finally sinking in her mind as she started to shiver. Holding on to the sides of her arms, she mumbled, "I'm cringing. I'm cringing. Shit, seriously." Aoife didn't feel exactly the same as Kira, but she, too, felt subtle hints of secondhand embarrassment from the story. Yes, Evelyn nodded, prompting Kira to cringe even further. "I think Leon was also there. If I'm not wrong, huh?" Evelyn turned toward where Leon had been moments prior, but paused when she realized that he was gone. "Leon, where's Leon?" Blinking her eyes, she looked around. "Wasn't he here just a moment ago? How did he?" The moon hung bright, its light spilling over the land below as a man stood beneath it, gazing upward and taking a deep, steadying breath. As he did, Leon's eyes opened as his soft voice echoed in the air. "Congratulations on your engagement." "Thank you," a voice whispered in response as Julian stepped forward, coming to a stop right beside him. He, too, raised his head to look at the moon. The two stood in silence, neither uttering a word. There was no need to say a word between the two of them understood each other perfectly. They lingered in the silence for several minutes, until Julian finally broke it. "I'll be leaving soon." "I know," Leon replied, his hand rising to his chest. The powerful sense of dread he had felt earlier still clung to him. It had grown even stronger, and though he was managing it better this time, his back remained drenched in sweat. Still, despite his best attempts at trying to ignore the sensation, he couldn't escape it. The sense of dread only grew more with each passing second. There were many things he wanted to ask Julian, but he held himself back. In the end, the only thing he found himself able to ask was, "How long will you be gone for?" "I don't know," Julian replied, his gaze still locked onto the distant moon. "It'll be a while for sure. Perhaps a year, or maybe more. I can't quite tell myself, since I am unsure of what will happen. This is all still new to me, and I've hardly had the time to process it." "I see," Leon nodded. Although Julian was trying his best to keep his voice steady and calm, Leon could feel it, the pain and desperation within it. He could tell that Julian didn't want any of this to happen. He was scared himself. However, it also appeared that he couldn't run away from it. He had to face it. Here, suddenly, Julian pulled his attention away from the moon and handed something to Leon. "This is..." Leon looked at the item, pausing the moment he caught a glimpse of it as he looked at Julian. "This is... I need you to hold on to this for me. It'll be important for the future. Like I said, you're the only one I can trust with this." Leon's face trembled as he stared at the item in Julian's hand, fully aware of what it was. He could feel the weight of the responsibility that the item held as his shoulders suddenly felt heavier. In the end, however, he nodded and reached for it. "I understand." He put the item away, prompting Julian to smile. "Thank you. I feel much better knowing that you're by my side." Leon didn't reply. Normally, he would have felt disgusted by comments like these, but this time, he didn't. He held onto his chest. The feeling of dread grew even thicker. So thick that he almost forgot how to breathe. Just what is?" "Don't worry about it," Julian replied, his gaze drifting back to the moon. "Just remember everything I've previously told you. To me, it'll only feel like a few minutes, but I know it will be a very long time. The only one who can bring me back is you. That's why I hope you take care of yourself while I'm gone." "Oh, and," Julian's gaze shifted slightly, as if recalling something important. "Whatever you do, keep everything to yourself. Even if the others press you for answers, don't say anything. This is all for your safety." Leon's lips opened, seemingly trying to say something, but Julian's next action caused him to stop at once. With a slow shift in his body, he extended his hand in his direction. As he did, his smile grew brighter. "Take care." The world grew silent in that moment, Leon's heart coming to a stop. But soon, staring at the outstretched hand, he calmed himself down. Reaching forward, he grasped the hand and shook it. "Take care. I'll be seeing you soon." Julian nodded, letting go of Leon's hand and nudging his chin toward the venue in the distance. "You should go now." Leon opened his mouth but eventually closed it and nodded before turning away and walking back toward the venue. "Goodbye." As his last words drifted in the air, Julian's gaze remained fixed on his retreating back, only feeling his shoulders relax once he saw him disappear into the forest as he entered the venue. Well, that's that. He had wanted to say goodbye to more people, but this wasn't something he could do. Everything had hit him so suddenly and so abruptly that he wasn't able to plan the way he left. But it's better this way. It wasn't that he didn't want to tell others more about the situation, it was more like he couldn't. To keep the future the same, this was something he had to do. Eventually, Julian closed his eyes. Swoosh! A cold breeze wafted through, causing his clothes to flutter. He didn't know how long had passed, but by the time he opened his eyes again, a figure stood before him. One whose features were no longer faceless as he greeted me with a smile. It looks like you were expecting me. Chapter 773, Goodbye 3. It was different compared to before. If before he gave me a deep sense of dread whenever he appeared, it wasn't the case this time. He looked calm, just like the surroundings. And yet, it was the strange calmness with which he carried himself that made my heart palpitate the most. I came as soon as I managed to absorb all of the blood. You know why I'm here, right? His voice was soft, too. Staring into the distance and then back to him, I took a good look at his real appearance for once. Or at least, what I thought was his real appearance. Ha, so that's how it was. It's been a while, Inquisitor Hollow. Torin smiled. It has indeed been a while, Julian. His smile was the same as it was in the past. That calm, yet very reassuring smile of his. I thought back to my past interactions with him and started to understand better. You knew from the start, right? More or less. I can't say that I was certain, but there aren't many people who enjoy the same type of comedy that I do. It was indeed nice to know that there was someone out there who enjoyed the same type of comedy that I do. Right, it felt almost like I was speaking with an old friend, and for a brief moment, the warmth of that thought made it seem real. Yet the memory of why he was here crept back into my mind, and the smile slowly drained from my face, leaving behind a heaviness I could no longer ignore. You're here to take the remaining blood, is that correct? Yes, and no, Torin replied, turning his gaze towards the distant venue. While I would love to, I'm not in any state to do so. It already took a great deal out of me to absorb what belonged to that puppet you created from the church. I doubt I could take in any more blood even if I wanted to. It may be at least 5 years before I'm able to attempt something like this again. Oh, this was a little unexpected. However, when I thought about it, it began to make sense. For me and Noel to do everything that we wanted, without him interfering or doing anything, I guess it must have taken a heavy toll on him just to try and absorb my blood. It'll likely be the same when he absorbs the next half. In that case, are you here just to collect it before it's too late? Torin's smile widened at my words. That's exactly it. He laughed a little while looking at me. You're too much of a variable. Your growth is also astounding. I can't let you keep growing stronger. It'll be too dangerous for me. I'm a little touched you think of me that way. Then again, he wasn't wrong. I was indeed quite the astounding talent. There were hardly any people, if any at all, who had reached the same rank as me at my age. Of course, it wasn't like I had done so without any help. I had plenty of help in order to reach the state that I was in. You don't need to be touched about a little praise. In the end, this is just the truth. You should also be aware of the fact that you're not just anybody. If you say so. The conversation between the two of us was still light. However, the more I talked, the more I could feel the air of finality within the conversation. It was drawing closer and closer to the end that I couldn't stop. These right here were probably going to be my last moments for quite some time. I planned on asking everything that I could. Why did you do the things that you did to her? Raising his brow, Torin blinked his eyes. He looked confused at first. But soon, he showed a look of understanding. Right. You just had an engagement. I heard all about it. Congratulations. He looked rather amused. I was a little taken aback when I found out about your engagement. I found out a few hours ago, just a little bit before I could make my way here. You can't believe how shocked I was when I heard about your engagement. It came as a massive surprise to me, but I also realized that it made sense. Torin suddenly leaned closer to me, his eyes glued to my face as his voice lowered into a whisper. You are trying to reach the same goal as I am. It's only natural that you'd want to experience love. I also do admit that the little girl is quite pretty. His lips suddenly pulled into a wide and creepy smile. I just didn't think you'd truly go for someone like he. You still haven't answered my question. I cut Torin off before he could go on with his nonsense. Why did you do what you did? I just really wanted to understand the true motives behind his actions. Was it simply because he wanted to create someone who was capable of fighting against the outer beings? Or was there more to it than I knew? Quote ellipsis dot dot quote. The smile on Torin's face faded slightly. He just stared at me for a couple of seconds before sighing and moving back. There were many reasons I did what I did. Above all, I wanted to fashion a weapon that could be used against them. By them, he meant the outer beings. And you didn't think it'd backfire on you? Oh, many times, Torin replied, his voice light. The thought truly crossed my mind many times. Then what? Torin tilted his head. Are you asking me why I'd keep her alive even if there was a possibility of all of this backfiring on me? Quote ellipsis dot dot quote. It's simple, really. Torin's voice lowered. I just didn't think of her as a threat. Besides you, there's no one who can threaten me. This isn't arrogance. This is the simple truth. In this world, there's no one stronger than me or who will ever be stronger than me. To some extent, you can even think of her as a failure. While she was indeed able to become strong, and she might very well reach the zenith too, at the end of the day, she can't grasp the source. There's little she can do when she can't grasp the source. She isn't a threat, but what if she can? Then that would mean that my experiment worked. Torin's face suddenly pulled into a happy smile, his eyes flickering with a certain excitement as his voice grew loud. Even if she does end up being a threat further down the line, the fact that she managed to touch upon the source means that the experiment went well. It means that I can create even more like her. Tapping onto his chest, his words hastened. If I can replicate the experiment and make more like her, I could produce countless beings to fight them. They might not be as strong individually, but an army of such creations would soon be enough to overthrow them and free the world from their tyranny. Torin's gaze flickered with madness as he spoke. This is why it's so important that she's allowed to roam free. She might be a failure for now, but if she manages to succeed. If that's the case, then it would mean that the path that I'm pursuing is correct. Either way, I don't lose. The madness was all too clear in his gaze. And yet, despite the madness, I could see a certain clarity within them. I could see that he had thoroughly thought about things carefully, and even though I wanted to argue against him, I found that I couldn't. His words, they made sense. And it was the realization that made my heart clench. It's a pity, though. Torin's voice lowered, bringing me out of my thoughts as I looked at him. What's a pity? Your body, Torin replied, pointing at me and prompting me to raise my brow. What could he? It's a mess. I can see that you've allowed yourself to be polluted by them. He shook his head, and I finally understood. He was talking about the weird black tendrils that had clouded my body. I thought about the discovery and how I had originally planned on asking Delilah about it. This was the original plan. However, given everything that had happened, I knew that asking would lead to nothing. Not because she didn't know, but because it was useless. There was no stopping what was about to happen to me. I'd just be wasting time. Are you ready? Torin's soft words whispered next to my ear, bringing chills down my entire body as I froze. My lips trembled, and I wanted to shake my head. However, I knew that this wasn't something that I could avoid. I was simply too weak. I couldn't escape him even if I wanted to. In the end, the only thing I could do was close my eyes and mumble, "Are you sure you want to do this?" Me, sure. His tone almost sounded mocking as he paused. Why wouldn't I be sure? You should know very well that I must do this in order to accomplish my goal. No, I'm not talking about that. My face grew relaxed as I looked at him, my voice growing colder at the same time. Although I wasn't sure, it almost felt as though a certain figure had appeared beside me, pressing his hand onto my shoulder as I spoke his direct words. There's nothing that can escape my grasp. I've seen and witnessed everything there is to witness. When I ask if you're sure you want to do this, what I'm really asking is whether you've considered if this was something I had planned in advance. I stopped right at the end of my sentence as a thought settled in my mind. In the end, I smiled and laughed. Never mind. Regardless of what you do, you'll always dance inside the palm of my hand. Do what you wish, all. I never had the chance to finish my sentence. My vision turned black right after. Thump. A body limply fell on the floor. A pair of cold eyes stared at the body. Torin's face was cold, so cold that it seemed to chill the surroundings. Swoosh. Not long after, a figure appeared behind him. His expression was complicated as he stared at the body on the floor. He could tell that he was still alive, his chest rising and falling slowly. Just as Atlas opened his mouth, Torin opened his mouth. It's gone. His expression turned colder upon muttering those words. The temperature plummeted further, and for a moment, Atlas felt his heart clench, an overwhelming fear gripping his heart. Thankfully, the sensation didn't last for long as Torin calmed down shortly after. He turned his attention towards Atlas. "Isn't he your disciple?" "Ah, yes." Atlas nodded slowly, his chest tensing further under Torin's gaze. Just when he found the tension unbearable, Torin spoke up. "I've broken the seal inside his body. Take good care of him. He might not be the same person, but the body is the same. The talents should still be there. Make sure he doesn't die since I still need his body further down the line." With those words, Torin's body began to fade. "Oh." But right as his body completely faded, as if recalling something, Torin added, "It's time that we stop being so passive. Get everything ready. From this moment forth, the Inverted Sky and every sister organization should do their best to leave an imprint on this world. It's about time we set our plans in motion." His body disappeared completely right after that. Quote. Atlas stood in silence, struggling to process the words. But soon, twitch, Julian's body began to twitch. Atlas's gaze fell on the body, and not long after, the eyes snapped open. "Hoo-ah!" Julian took a deep breath, his expression twisting at the same time as he hastily looked around. "Where the fuck is this? What's going on?" His shouts echoed within the forest as his gaze wandered from left to right. In the end, his gaze fell on Atlas as his gaze contorted. "Hey, bastard, where the fuck?" "Shish." Atlas pressed his finger on his mouth, stripping Julian of his voice as he quietly stared at him. Julian's eyes widened at the sight, his face changing as he tried to say something, but Atlas didn't allow him as he quietly spoke up. "My name is Atlas, and I've been tasked to train you." Looking at Julian and seeing his current defiant expression, Atlas closed his eyes and sighed. "This will take a long time." Waving his hand, the two disappeared shortly after that. From that day, the Inverted Sky made its name known to the world. The same was true for each sister organization. They rapidly spread their influence throughout the world. Unknown superpowers began to emerge across the world, completely upending the established powers, seizing territory from empires, and igniting a prolonged war that led to many casualties. Of such power, one became especially infamous. Julian Dacre Evanis, The Low Seat of Madness. Chapter 774, A Villain 1. Crackle tilde. The fire raged on. It crackled in the air, devouring the timber beams one by one. Windows shattered under the heat, spilling glass like falling stars, while tongues of flame licked greedily at the curtains, swallowing them whole in a single breath. The estate groaned. Smoke coiled upward in choking plumes, blotting out the night sky, while embers rained down on the ground. Quote. A figure stood outside the fire, staring at the raging fire with a blank expression. Crackle, crackle, the faint sound of screams echoing in the background. People rushing in and out, screaming at him. "Leave this place. You must run, family head. Run before it's too late. You must save yourself, family head." Aha! A tremor ran down the figure's body, the haze in his eyes clearing as he snapped out of it. His lips quivered as he did. I should have known." He brought his hand to his chest, slowly clenching it. Why did I not do it? Why did I not kill him when I had the chance? Tears streamed down his face, smearing the ash that had settled on his face. It had all happened incredibly quickly, but he could still remember it all vividly. A purple dome that covered the entire area. Hands that shot out from beneath the ground, grasping at the maids and workers in the estate. Screams. Falling bodies. The night group coming, but inevitably getting pushed back. Captain Albaz's shouts. Linus could recall all of it as he stood numbly, replays of the scenes flashing in his mind. But in particular, if there was one thing that he could remember, it was the cold figure that stood at the center of it all. His gaze was cold, so cold that it almost felt chilling. But at the same time, he saw it. The madness hidden within his gaze. I should've. All that was left was regret. He thought that possibly, the nightmares were fake. That Julian had changed. But that wasn't the truth. He had always been the same. The nightmares weren't fake. They were a premonition of the future that was to come. If only, he could have trusted them. All of this, it was on him. Ha! Hearing another scream, Linus slowly turned his head. Right, I still need to help. His body was heavy, and he could barely stand. He had fought alongside the guards, but even he was helpless. It was just one person, but he was enough to completely overwhelm him. Help. Someone help me. Stumbling back towards the raging fire, Linus used his last bits of energy to help anyone who was in need. One more. Just one more. Princess, the situation is dire. There's been an attack in Evanes County. Reports say the main estate is in flames. For now, the assaults have halted there, but we believe they will continue. A figure sat on a throne, her cold gaze flickering upon hearing the report. Her long red hair cascaded down her shoulders as her yellow eyes shone under the dim lighting of the room. She sat in silence, a silent pressure coming down on the room before she nodded. I understand. You may leave. But princess, did I not make myself clear? Although Aoife didn't shout, the pressure that came out of her voice was enough to cause the attendant to shiver as she hurriedly closed her mouth and left the room, leaving Aoife sitting in silence. The silence stretched on as she looked ahead. How much time had passed since he turned? Aoife had started to forget. It all happened suddenly. It wasn't instant. It was gradual. Aoife had been so busy with the succession that she had never gotten the chance to pay close attention to him. Still, he was useful to her. He helped her push her brother onto the brink of destruction. But that was when it happened. Strange, powerful figures appeared out of nowhere, striking the Empire from multiple fronts. They were brutal and efficient, each attack felt calculated, and all the momentum she had fought to build crumbled away. Aoife tried to resist, but they were incredibly powerful. They drove her onto a path of retreat, and it was only after a year of relentless battles that she managed to find the slightest semblance of balance. Perhaps it was the unending stress of battle or the relentless threats she faced, but her abilities began to surge at an astonishing pace. In only a year spent at the front lines, she broke through from the 6th tier to the 7th, a feat that would have taken others far longer. Even then, her progress showed no signs of slowing, hinting at even greater heights yet to come. Her growth was so astonishing that it started to make her question herself. Is my growth really because of all the dangers that I've faced, or is there more to it? She wasn't entirely sure, but this wasn't a change that she disliked. The more powerful she became, the greater say she would have with her army and citizens. Do you really think it's a coincidence? Suddenly, a voice pierced the silence surrounding her. Aoife turned to her left and was met with a smile. One worn by a figure that looked far too much like herself. Aoife didn't react to her sudden appearance. She had grown used to it by now. Is this your doing? Ha ha. The figure smiled, her smile stretching all the way to her eyes. There's no such coincidence in this world. One does not simply become this strong from just battle. Her finger pressed onto the bottom of Aoife's chin, lifting it up slightly as the pair of yellow eyes met. The power that we hold within our bodies is immense. Far stronger than you can ever imagine. You've only just started to tap into it because you've started to become of age, but it won't be long until you gain full access to it. Once that happens, nothing will stop us. We'll be able to rule this world. Aoife's yes grew hazy upon hearing the words. Rule the world. It didn't sound too bad. In fact, it sounded rather tempting. But, I'll think about it. Aoife's eyes snapped out of their haze as she looked ahead. The figure next to her faded, and the doors slowly began to open. Kriak. A figure appeared shortly after. Clad in a black hood, their features were obscured. Yet Aoife didn't need to see their face to recognize them. When the hood was finally lowered, a pair of haggard gray eyes stared back at her. A pair of yellow eyes met a pair of gray. You look terrible. In the end, Aoife was the one to break the silence as she looked at Leon. Her words held a lot of truth. Leon's current state was terrible. Heavy dark circles sagged beneath his eyes, his face was drained of color, and his lips were cracked and dry. It was clear he hadn't known proper rest in a very long time. And that was probably the truth. Ever since the incident with Julian, he had been different. Aoife's face turned colder at the thought. What are you here for? Quote. Leon's lips quivered. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he kept his gaze fixed on her, seemingly trying to get his words out. What is it? What are you struggling too hard to say? Are you going to tell me how the Julian that is currently rampaging the Empire isn't the same Julian that I know? Aoife suddenly smirked. I'm not that stupid. I can tell that there's something wrong. Even so, her eyes flickered with a cold and dangerous light. It doesn't change the fact that he's become a monster. If you're here to tell me to stop, fine. And no. A hoarse voice cut Aoife off, prompting her to stop as she looked at Leon. No. What are you? I am not going to stop you. Leon answered a moment later, his voice growing even hoarser. His words caused Aoife to pause as she took a good look at him. You're not going to stop me? No. Leon shook his head, blinking his tired eyes. I'm not going to stop you. he repeated, trying to make sure she heard him correctly. His sudden actions prompted Aoife to frown as she slowly stood up from her throne. You're saying that you're going to allow me to kill Julian, or whoever that person is? If you must. Leon nodded slowly. Aoife's eyes narrowed, her thoughts racing as she tried to discern Leon's intentions. Yet the longer she studied him, the clearer it became just how serious he truly was. In the end, her face relaxed and she sighed. Relax, I'm not going to do anything to him yet. Not because I don't want to, but because it's impossible for me to do so. The Empire was in a state of turmoil. Julian wasn't the only individual that she needed to worry about. There were several others. The issue lay in the fact that the other empires were also struggling to handle the current situation. Her empire wasn't the only one that had been attacked by these strange forces. All empires were facing the same situation. Normally, Aoife wouldn't have worried so much about the situation. Her empire was powerful, and with notable figures like Delilah, it would usually be hard for any external force to do anything to them. But this was the problem. Things would be calm if Delilah were present. However, after the announcement of her engagement, which occurred several years back, she vanished entirely from the empire and from the world itself. It was as if her very existence had been erased. Many had tried to get in touch with the Duke, but even he wasn't sure. In the end, the situation turned out like it had because of her disappearance. Had she not? No, there's no use thinking about it. There were no what-ifs in this world. The situation had already unfolded as it had. All she could do now was look ahead and try to find a way out of the predicament she faced. Lost in her thoughts, she failed to notice the subtle shift in Leon's expression. He closed his eyes, sensing a faint pulse emanating from his chest. As the rhythm grew, his features began to change, and he instinctively brought his hand to the spot where the chalice rested. Feeling the pulse, Leon's lips parted. A conversation from long ago echoed in his mind, and the hand pressed against his chest clenched tightly. Could this be the signal? Could he finally stop this hell from continuing any further? Clank. The doors of the room burst open, and a figure rushed in. Princess. Her voice was panicked, bringing both Leon and Aoife's attention towards her. Just before Aoife could say a word, the attendant shouted. We've managed to stop the seed of madness. The attendant swallowed, quickly catching her breath as she resumed, he's in the mirror crack in Bremer. Leon's face changed as the sensation in his chest settled. It was there that he understood. His hell. It was finally going to come to an end. Chapter 775, A Villain 2. Quote. A figure stood amidst the debris. The air was dry, and a white sun hung over the sky, washing the world below in a pale, lifeless glow. Quote. I should be in the right place. Julian muttered, his gaze sweeping the surroundings. This was supposed to be the area within the area of the mirror crack in Bremer. It was just a little bit outside the safe zone. However, this was exactly where he needed to be as he took out a small object from out of thin air. Master told me that I have to plan this over here, correct? He looked around. All he could see were shattered buildings and crumbling structures. In the end, he shrugged his shoulders. It's whatever. He tossed the object onto the ground and stomped on it with his foot. This should do for now. If Master has any complaints, I'll just change it. I'm sure he'll call me when the time comes. Julian reached out for his communication device. He stared at it for a good moment, waiting for several minutes until it turned on. Have you done what was asked of you? A soft voice echoed from the communication device. Julian's brows furrowed for a moment, but he eventually nodded his head. Yes, I have completed the mission. That's good. I'm sure the Seed of Dawn will be happy with your actions. You think? A smile cracked on Julian's features. To him, his master was everything. He was the sole reason why he was allowed to live again, and he was also the person who had helped him become who he was today. In the years that he had spent with him, he was able to learn a lot. In particular, the way he carried himself. I'd be happy if that were the case. Julian was no longer consumed by madness and obsession like he was in the past. He came to learn to control such emotions, never outwardly showing them, but instead, using them to fuel and control his power. The way a person carried themselves was also a reflection of their power. The more out of control one was, the more out of control their power was. It was only when one had absolute control over their emotions and the way they behaved that they'd truly become strong. You shouldn't be happy just yet. I've received a report that those from the Empire are surrounding the mirror crack. They're looking to eliminate you. They are. Yes. It seems like there are quite a few powerful people. Do you need help? Julian's eyes narrowed. Despite getting told about the situation, he didn't look at all concerned. If anything, there was even a glint of excitement in his gaze. However, he was able to quickly suppress that excitement as he shook his head. Help would be nice, but I think it's a little too late for that. I can already feel them coming from a distance. By the time you arrive, it'll all be over. It's best if I use this chance to run away. Are you sure? Yes. Julian's voice remained calm despite the situation. It would certainly be helpful if she chose to assist. As the low seat of attraction, one of the low seats, she possessed considerable power. The issue was that even if she were to come, it would be hard for them to win. Now that I think about it, I did hear that she used to be in the same academy as me. What was her name again? Elizabeth Smith, or something like that. He had never bothered to ask her. Nonetheless, she used to be one of the Black Stars of Haven. There was no questioning her abilities. If you want to be of help to me, how about you create a waypoint for me to escape? While I don't think I won't be able to handle the people coming at me, it's always best to set up a contingency plan. I understand. I wish you luck. With a soft nod, the communication ended. Julian's eyes narrowed further as he looked towards the distance. In truth, there was something that he hadn't been truthful about. He wasn't really planning on escaping. It wasn't because he was confident in his victory. He was, in fact, unsure. The original plan had truly been to run away. However, that all changed the moment he felt a familiar aura. He wasn't even hiding it. He was showing proudly, almost as if he was taunting him. Well, that's fine. This all worked out for him. He had been waiting to see him again. Not just because there were several things that he wanted to talk with him about, but because there was something that he needed from him. Julian slowly brought his hand to his chest, clenching it. Finally, he could get his hands on the thing that would make him whole again. Swoosh, swoosh. One figure after another began to emerge within the safe zone. Clad in armor and robes, they all carried a powerful and somber air, their movements steady, as though each of their actions was rehearsed beforehand. Each presence seemed to thrum faintly against the air, their armors glinting under the pale white sun above. At the helm of the group stood Aoife, her cold gaze sweeping the surroundings. She carried a commanding presence, one strong enough to press back against the collective weight of pressure radiating from the army itself. Cast a net over the area. Find him and trap him at any cost. Her eyes narrowed, and the air grew colder. Even if it costs you your life. Find him, no matter what. It felt as though the air had been stripped from the place. Every eye stayed fixed on the princess as her gaze swept the perimeter. Then, one by one, the guards slipped away, racing toward the mirror dimension's access points. Only one figure did not move. It was only when everyone left that he finally turned his attention towards Aoife. You've changed a lot. Aoife turned her attention to Leon. Noticing the way he was looking at her, the coldness in her expression softened, melting ever so slightly. She, too, was clad in armor, protecting her chest, shoulders, hips, and legs. As her red hair fluttered silently in the air, she looked towards the distance. I never truly understood it before, but ruling an empire is far from easy. Her words drifted softly through the air as her eyes grew momentarily hazy. An empire cannot be governed by mercy alone. Only authority and power hold it together. Show even the slightest weakness, and who knows what might happen. I might very well find my head separated from my body. There was a certain irony in her words as she spoke. I'm tired of all this. I want to leave everything behind and return to how things once were. I didn't realize it at the time, but those days at the academy were probably the best of my life. If only I had known I was living in the good times before they ended, I would have cherished them more. A pity I can no longer do that. Shaking her head, Aoife redirected her gaze towards Leon. I don't know exactly what happened with Julian, but you need to understand that in my position, I have no choice but to eliminate him. I am not going to stop you. Leon answered flatly, his robes shifting silently as his gaze remained fixed on the mirror crack. Soon, the crack hummed, and shortly after, a couple of figures emerged, causing Aoife to raise an eyebrow as she glanced at Leon. What are you? Where did? Aoife hastily looked around, stunned by Leon's sudden disappearance. He had just been here a moment prior. Oi! A voice reached Aoife not long after, causing her to freeze on the spot. Even after years have passed, you still haven't changed. You still look like a bitch. Swoosh. Leon's figure blurred, passing through several areas. Cough. From time to time, he coughed, his chest tightening under a crushing pressure. It was as if a massive boulder had been set upon him, pressing down relentlessly. He nonetheless ignored it. Almost done. I'm almost done. He was beyond tired. It had been a very long time since he had gotten some proper sleep. The years had been like a blur to him. His strength had gone through significant changes, with him mastering everything that he had learned from Mortem. He had now reached the pinnacle of Tier 7, just a small step away from ascending to Tier 8. He had already succeeded in merging his domain with the outside world. All that remained was to shatter it completely. However, that was easier said than done. That was the quickest, yet most difficult step. One wrong move and he'd be crippled for a long time, if not permanently. He had been holding out for quite some time. Leon just never felt that he was in the right condition to attempt such a dangerous task. Taking a deep breath, Leon finally came to a stop and surveyed his surroundings. He was standing amidst the ruins of a city. One he had been to before. Right, this is the same place where the summit had been. The Regalia monarchy, right. Leon wasn't entirely sure, it had been a long time since the summit. Yet he was certain he had been here before. As his gaze swept across the ruins, it eventually settled on a specific area where several figures had gathered. He dashed towards them, but as he did, his expression shifted. Because they're dead. From their armor, it was clear they belonged to Aoife's army. They all stood in formation, ready to battle, but as Leon drew closer and got a better look, he realized how wrong that impression was. Though upright, their faces were drained of all color, their skin completely dry, and their eyes fixed in horror on something in the distance. Leon's expression shifted subtly as he dashed forward. As he did, he was met with similar sights. His chest grew heavier and heavier with each passing second, until he came to an eventual stop. A figure stood on top of a broken building, their cold gaze locked in Leon's direction. For a moment, time seemed to come to a total standstill between the two of them. But that was until, "You're here." A smirk began to play on the figure's lips, his eyes flickering into a purple hue as he extended his hand. "Hand it over," he muttered, his voice calm. "The chalice. Hand it over." Chapter 776, A Villain 3. A pair of eyes met. One gray, one hazel. The world came to a standstill the moment the two stopped to look at each other. In the end, the silence between the two didn't last for long. "Are you not going to give it to me?" He looked the same, but he wasn't the same. For a brief moment, Leon felt his chest tremble. However, he was quick to calm himself down as he closed his eyes before opening them up again and staring at Julian. "I apologize, but I don't think you'll be able to do that." "Why?" Rather than getting angry, Julian remained calm. This was different compared to the crazed Julian he had grown up with. "Why won't you give me the chalice? Are you worried that the moment I drink whatever is in the chalice, your little friend will never be able to come back?" A soft smile marred Julian's features as he looked around. "You're right about that." His expression contorted for a brief moment. In that moment, Leon almost seemed to see the real, raw, version that he had grown up to see. And yet, just as it seemed like Julian would lose himself to the anger, he took a couple of breaths and calmed himself down. Right, I'm no longer that person." He massaged his head while looking back at Leon with a calm look. One that left Leon deeply unsettled. "Since you won't give me the chalice, I'll have no choice but to take it myself." Julian looked around, his eyes narrowing. "I'll have to be quick, though. I don't think I have much time." Julian's eyes turned purple right after that. Immediately, something about the surroundings changed. They grew heavier, colder. Chills started to run down Leon's body as he looked at Julian. He had heard all about his exploits and strength. However, it was only now that he was standing before him that he could feel just how much more powerful Julian had become. Just one look was enough to send chills down his spine, and at the same time, blind him. Yes, blind him. Leon lost his sight. Everything turned completely black. Exclamation mark question mark quote. Leon's heartbeat quickened as he forced himself to remain calm, his ears perking up to catch any sound around him. Swoosh. There, with a twist of his body, a sword materialized in Leon's hand as he slashed down in the direction from which he felt the movement was coming. But, exclamation mark quote. He was unable to hit anything as his sword sliced through the air. Swoosh. The wind behind him stirred, and Leon grew alarmed. Bang. He stomped his foot against the ground, halting mid-motion. His torso twisted sharply, joints popping and bones creaking under the sudden strain, the sound cutting through the air like dry wood bending. Ha! In just a brief moment, Leon managed to alter the course of his attack. This time, he was finally able to hit something. Bang! Leon found his vision returning as he looked ahead, where a figure stood, looking a little impressed as he massaged his neck. That's pretty impressive. You have some serious control over your muscles. Julian complimented, looking completely unscathed. Leon didn't feel much from the compliment. At least, not from him. However, it was also true that he had absolute control over every muscle in his body. He hadn't been wasting his time in the past 2 years. He had trained without pause, every single day, never once taking a break. He sought out experts from every empire, including his master in his own empire. The result was this: absolute muscle control. You're pretty good yourself, Leon replied, trying to take this opportunity to vibrate his inner muscles, warming them up further. The more warmed up they were, the more he could control them. Thank you, I've trained quite diligently under my master, Julian replied, his gaze falling into his hand as it turned completely purple. I still find it hard to believe that he would neglect curse magic this much. Is it because he's simply not adept at it? Or is it because I'm simply that much better than he was? Julian moved his fingers, his purple eyes flickering as he turned his attention back to Leon. Maybe that's the case. What a pity, he was missing out so much. Snap, he snapped his fingers. ! Leon's expression changed. However, it was too late. How? He lost his vision again. There are just so many possibilities with curse magic. Just look at you now. With just a snap of my fingers, I made you lose your sight. Leon's head flicked to his right where he heard the voice. But sight isn't the only thing I can remove from you. Snap. With a sudden snap, Leon suddenly lost all hearing. The world around him grew completely silent. From sound to vision, he had lost both. Shit, Leon's face crumbled. For a moment, he grew flustered. This was the first time he had ever encountered something like this. It wasn't like he had never encountered a scenario where he had lost one of his senses. But both. No, I can't let him get close to me. Thankfully, Leon had a good memory. Even though his sight and hearing were impaired, he was aware of exactly where he was. Without wasting a single second, he pressed his foot onto the ground and pushed himself away. Feeling the snap of his legs, he relied on his remaining senses to make sense of his surroundings. With everything memorized, he had a good idea of where he was going as he started to dash in different directions, trying his best to buy time for himself. Just like before, there's a time limit for each of the curses. So long as I last until then, I should be fine. The real issue at hand was trying to figure out how Julian had managed to plant the curses on him. So what if he managed to wait for long enough for the curses to die down? If Julian were to curse him again, then he'd be doing the same thing again. He had to think quickly. No, wait, Leon suddenly stopped, an idea popping into his mind. Right, why didn't I think of that? So what if he didn't have his sight or hearing? What did those matters when he had his domain? Leon pressed down onto the ground, and the surroundings shifted. All of a sudden, a clear outline of every single rock and building appeared in his vision, including. There you are. Leon's legs snapped, releasing all the built-up tension like the string of a bow drawn to its limit. ! Perhaps not expecting Leon to do this, Julian wasn't able to react in time as Leon appeared before him in the snap of a second. Still, Julian reacted fast enough to summon a large purple hand, covering his entire body. Bang! The hand shattered almost immediately, but it was just about enough to absorb most of the power coming from Leon's attack. Julian tried to follow up with another attack, but Leon was faster. With his entire body glowing a yellow hue, the stars faded from the surroundings. His body gained an unbelievable amount of power as his muscles swelled, and his speed shot through the roof. He was so fast that Julian didn't even have the time to react before Leon was already upon him. ! His sword sliced down. Swoosh. But Julian's figure faded completely, revealing an illusion as Leon's head turned backward. He still couldn't hear or see, but he didn't need such senses within his domain. At this very moment, he could see and feel everything that was within his domain. As such, the moment Julian's after image faded and he appeared again, he was already upon Julian, his sword cleaving down from above. Despite the suddenness of Leon's appearance, Julian wasn't flustered. But rather, a smirk tugged at his lips as the sword came down. Then, it swerved away from Julian. Almost as if the reality around Julian was completely different. Leon's expression underwent a change, but it was too late. This was the exact moment Julian had been waiting for as his eyes flickered. Eye of existence. Leon's mind grew blank. Then, Julian's hand sharply moved forward, grabbing Leon by the head. Got you. Quote. Exclamation mark quote. Snapping out of it, Leon kicked Julian in the abdomen to distance himself. Bang. Cook. Not expecting Leon's speed, Julian couldn't block his abdomen. He stumbled back several steps, clutching his stomach as saliva spattered from his mouth. Hewerk. KH. The pain was a lot stronger than expected. It drove Julian to his knees as he lurched forward, vomit spilling from his mouth. As a mage, his body was extremely weak. Not only that, but he was also not the same as the parasite. He didn't have the same domain, and as such, didn't have ways to protect his body from close attacks. Ewer. Fighting to hold back his vomit, Julian sensed a presence before him. Slowly, he lifted his head. Leon stood before him, eyes closed. Rather than panicking, the smirk returned to Julian's lips as he looked at Leon. Quote. You don't look so well. Indeed. Moments after muttering those words, red trickled from Leon's eyes, streaking down his cheeks. Blood soon followed from his nostrils and ears as well. Leon's body started to tremble, and he staggered back. Ha! Julian held the urge to laugh, slowly picking himself back up as the domain around him started to shrink back into Leon's body. He kept alert while staring at Leon. He knew that the fight was far from over. Leon wasn't going to fall so easily. It doesn't feel so great, right? Julian stared at his hand as it grew a deep shade of purple, almost turning black. My curse. It doesn't feel good, right? He punched toward Leon. Magic circles sprang up around him, and purple hands shot from them, latching onto Leon. His expression turned even paler. Despite this, Leon continued to resist as he stumbled back. Julian's face turned cold at the sight as his eyes narrowed. Where is it? Where is the chalice? Julian had to get the chalice. It was the key to becoming whole again. He couldn't live with the thought of his body being taken over once more. The anxiety it brought was nightmarish. There were days when he couldn't sleep, thinking that the moment he closed his eyes, he'd find himself back in that prison that had sealed him for so long. He couldn't do it. He wouldn't do it. The chalice. Julian's voice grew even colder, his expression slowly crumbling. Give it to me before I have to kill you for it. His hand rose, and hands latched onto Leon. Just as Julian was about to take another step, he froze, eyes landing on the blue veins suddenly spreading across Leon. There it is. A slow and gradual smile began to spread on his lips moments later. It wasn't so hard, was it? Chapter 777, A Villain 4. Leon's body began to glow with faint blue lines. They traced across his skin, following the path of every vein, until all of them converged toward his chest. At his chest, the glow sharpened, not into the shape of his heart, but into the faint outline of a chalice. Julian's lips curled at the sight. There it is. His heart started to race. This was the very thing he had been searching for all this time. The sight of it left his chest tight, breath caught somewhere between relief and excitement. The chalice before him was the key to his freedom. Single quote. I no longer want to be stuck in that prison. In the past 2 years, Julian had learned to cherish the life that he had. It was weird, but in all the time he was imprisoned, he learned to admire and appreciate everything that he didn't before. From the soft breeze of the wind, the faint sweetness of flowers, to the steady warmth of the sun. Julian learned that there was more to the world than his narrow-minded path of hatred and vengeance. This was also the reason why he had managed to calm down so much. He had finally learned to cherish his life, and he wasn't planning on ever letting anything or anyone take it away from him. Just give it to me. Julian took a step towards Leon. He wasn't in a good state. The curse magic gnawed at him from the inside, running wild through his veins. Blood seeped from his nose, his ears, and even the corners of his eyes, leaving his face streaked with blood. Despite this, Leon didn't look like he was about to give up. Though unsteady, he still remained standing, his gaze fixed on Julian. Seeing Leon act like this, the smile on Julian's face faded. Why are you struggling so much? He didn't understand it. Wasn't he just a knight? As far as he knew, he was also a prince. He was still struggling to understand how a prince had become his knight, but that wasn't the point. The point was, what's the point of doing all of this when you can just go back home to your family and enjoy a good life? You're not even a knight anymore. Why do you do the things that you do? Julian didn't just ask the question to fulfill his curiosity. He wanted to waste time. The longer it lingered, the stronger the curse magic grew, tightening its grip on him with each passing moment. Julian knew how powerful Leon was. If possible, he didn't want to take any risks. Especially when he understood that Leon wasn't the only person present within the mirror dimension. He was practically surrounded from all sides. Quote. Ha! A soft laugh grabbed Julian's attention again as he looked at Leon. With a smile that seemed to have taken everything out of him, he mumbled, I wonder too. What does that mean? I don't know. Leon drew in several steadying breaths, his shoulders rising and falling as he forced his eyes shut. Blood still seeped from his eyelids, trickling down his cheeks, but he pushed past the pain, focusing inward. The chalice etched within him pulsed. Once, faint light rippling through his veins, and slowly, his wounds began to knit themselves back together. The sudden changes took Julian by surprise, his body tensing. The chalice within Leon's body pulsed further, and the bleeding finally stopped. This was the moment that Julian understood that he had underestimated Leon. At the same time, however, his breath grew more ragged as he looked at the chalice. I want it even more now. His eyes glowed purple once more. A black film began to expand from beneath him, inching towards Leon rapidly. It was too bad that Leon's eyes snapped open the moment he did that. Stomping his foot down, he disappeared from the spot, appearing several meters away. Julian's expression grew serious, and several magic circles spiraled into existence before him, glowing in shades of deep purple, each one twisting and rotating in the air. With a sharp thrust of his hand forward, the circles flared. Purplish green hands erupted from the magic circles, clawing through the air as they reached for Leon. Their fingers twisted unnaturally, grasping with a hunger that made it seem like they were desperate. But Leon moved as though he had eyes in the back of his head, slipping past each attempt with sharp, instinctive precision. Bang! His feet slammed into the ground, cracking the surface beneath him as he launched forward, stomping hard toward Julian. He arrived before Julian, who, for the first time, grew a little flustered. Quote. Exclamation mark question mark quote. Still, he was only flustered for a brief moment before collecting himself as his eyes narrowed and he focused his intent on his surroundings. The gravity around him pulsed, and Leon's movements lagged for a brief second. That brief second was all Julian needed. His head turned towards Leon as his mouth opened. And then, shoo, threads shot out from his mouth. Quote. Question mark exclamation mark quote. Leon's face changed at the unexpected sight, flinching for just a moment as he raised his hand to block. But, swoosh, the threads shot past his body. Shit. Realizing almost instantly that it was an illusion, Leon spun back, hand shooting toward his head as he ducked under the attack. He pivoted on his foot, swinging the hilt of his sword upward, aiming straight for Julian's chest. Wham! The hilt of his sword met a knee, and Julian's face winced under the pain. Leon didn't pause. He twisted, elbow rising as he spun around, appearing at Julian's flank. His elbow landed first, striking at his exposed torso. This time, Julian was a step too late to react. Wham! The attack hit. Julian's face paled, pain curling at the side of his body as he staggered to the side. Leon didn't waste the opening. The intensified gravity weighed down on him, forcing every muscle to scream under the strain, yet he moved almost as fast as he normally would. The chalice in his chest continued to pulse, revitalizing his every movement. In that moment, he became a war machine. Relentless, unthinking, driven only to strike without hesitation or mercy. He completely sealed all his thoughts, removing the chance of being affected by Julian's bone abilities. He was the person who knew Julian's abilities the best. As such, he was also the person who knew how to handle him the best. With his elbow driving down into Julian's shoulder, forcing a grunt from him, Leon extended his hand. A sword materialized, forged entirely from his mana. He swung it downward, and Julian's eyes widened, flickering with alarm. Shit, Julian knew he had to act fast. He was being driven back by Leon, of all people, the same one he had once toyed with mercilessly when they were young. No, I can't allow that. His eyes flickered, and his mana drained rapidly. One of his bones churned. Eye of existence. Leon's movements paused the moment that Julian used the technique. Success. Julian thought in his mind as he braced himself, preparing to counterattack. But before he could even savor the moment, Leon's mana-forged sword came crashing down again. What? Julian truly grew flustered by the sight, his face crumpling as several magic circles appeared all around him. Sight, sound, smell, touch, taste, Julian sealed all of Leon's senses. And yet, he continued to strike down, the sword aimed right at him. It was almost as if he didn't need any of his senses. Exclamation mark question mark quote. Julian had truly run out of options at this moment. The only thing he could do was stare blankly at the sword above him as it struck down towards him. But, quote. The inevitable blow never came. Instead, a tense silence fell. Leon stood directly before Julian, his body etched with glowing blue lines, frozen in place, the mana-forged sword hovering just above Julian's head as the heat coming from it spread in waves around his face. The silence lasted for several seconds as they both stood in silence. And then, Bjorg, blood spilled out from Leon's mouth, falling onto the ground as his entire face turned pale, and the blue lines around his body pulsed wildly. Julian stared at the sight in shock, but soon a smile played around his lips. As expected, he wasn't unaffected. Julian looked down at Leon. His entire body was covered in thin red lines, each formed from the threads he had silently spread around himself. They were meant to be his final line of defense. Individually, each thread was fragile, almost laughably weak, but that was how they were designed to be. They weren't meant to hurt a lot or be felt. They just had to hurt a little, but enough to be ignored. The result, a slow and unknown accumulation of curse magic within the body. Bjorg. Blood spilled from Leon's mouth as he dropped to one knee, his body trembling under the weight of the curse eating at him. The blue veins etched across his skin flared with light, pulsing violently as if straining against his injuries, forcing themselves to knit his body back together even as more blood flowed. But would Julian allow him to heal? If you'll excuse me. Having already learned his lesson, he moved rapidly towards Leon before pressing his hand against his chest. Leon screamed with pain as blood began to seep out from his chest, Julian's hand digging right into it. Relax. You should already be numb from my curse. This doesn't hurt as much as you think it does. Blood spattered across Julian's hand as he drove it into Leon's chest, the blue veins along Leon's body flaring brighter than ever. Julian ignored it all, focusing only on digging deeper, until his fingers closed around the chalice and he finally pulled it free. Spurt. Harg. A heart-wrenching scream echoed from Leon's lips as he staggered back, falling onto the ground as blood continued to gush out from his chest. Ha! Ha! His screams echoed wildly, filling the surroundings. And yet, Julian paid them no mind. His entire focus was on the chalice in his hand as his eyes glowed with excitement. Yes, finally, I finally have my hand on this. His heart pounded as he held the black chalice, its contents swirling with a strange, dark liquid. His own reflection stared back at him from within it, and in the background, Leon's screams slowly faded into silence. The world grew silent in that moment. It was just him and the chalice. But Julian didn't spend much time admiring the chalice. He gripped the chalice tightly, and then, just like that, it vanished from his hands. He lifted his head not long after. Rumble, rumble, the surroundings quaked, and his lips pulled into a smile. It's about time. I thought they'd be slower. Chapter 778. The Last Angle 1. A few moments prior. What do you think happened to Julian? The question came from out of nowhere. It was something that each was curious about, but didn't dare voice out. The relationship between the three had changed over the years. With Aoife busy handling her duties, and the two taking care of their territories, they didn't have as much time to talk with each other. It's obvious that he's changed. Do you think he's the same person that we know? Aoife's question pulled the group into a brief silence. Evelyn slowed to a stop, the heavy scent of iron and dust clinging to the air, mingling with the faint warmth of the sun filtering in. She took in the surroundings with a cautious glance before giving a small shake of her head. No, I don't think so. Evelyn had long understood that Julian carried his own secrets. The boy she had known in their youth was not the same as the man she had come to know later. Aoife was also of the same opinion. She too knew about the fact that the Julian that she knew wasn't the real Julian. That was why she clung to the hope that it really wasn't him. And yet, thinking about the possibility that it was truly him, Aoife felt her chest ache. She really wanted to be wrong. After all, despite all of their differences, he was a person that had helped her grow. He was someone that she truly trusted. Please let me be wrong. The same was true for Kira as she didn't say a word, her gaze silently locked towards the distance. She too hoped it was all fake, or some sort of scheme. Aoife suddenly stopped, looking up as her eyes narrowed. I can feel fluctuations coming from the distance, she muttered, her hair fluttering in the wind as her gaze lingered over a certain building. Her heart raced as she turned and looked to her sides. A pair of familiar figures appeared. They too stared into the distance with certain frowns. I can feel it too. I think Leon managed to find Julian. They should be in the middle of a fight. The fluctuations were wild, and they could reach all the way towards where they were. Aoife turned her attention behind her, right where her soldiers appeared. There were quite a few of them, each stronger than the other. The issue, however, lay in the fact that there were many of them. At the rate that we're moving, we won't be able to make it towards where Leon is. Aoife had full faith in Leon's abilities. However, she also understood Julian's abilities. He wasn't someone that they could simply dismiss, even if they wanted to. In fact, the last time that she remembered, Julian was stronger than Leon. The gap wasn't wide before, but it had started to widen after a while. Aoife wasn't exactly sure of Leon's current strength, as he had been missing for quite some time, but if there was one thing that she was aware of, it was Julian's current strength. He had caused quite a lot of stir within the Empire over the past couple of years. She wasn't sure, but Aoife had a feeling that Julian was currently at least tier 8. Having seen Leon beforehand, she didn't think he'd be able to last for too long against Julian. We should hurry up and help him. Aoife came to a decision rather quickly as she turned back to look at her army. Try to keep up, I'll be going first. Stomping her foot onto the ground, her body shot in the direction of where she felt the fluctuations. Wait, where are you going so fast? Aoife. Startled, Kira and Evelyn hesitated for just a beat, a fraction slower than Aoife, before breaking into a dash toward the same source of the fluctuations. As they did, a heavy tension filled the group. Boom. A distant building disintegrated, and from within its ruins emerged a particular figure. The world came to a sudden stop. Their eyes met, and Julian instantly sensed an overwhelming weight pressing down on his body. I finally found you. A screeching voice reverberated through the air, and the sky turned a scarlet color. The pressure that bore down on Julian increased, and she soon appeared before his eyes. Adorned with flowing, fiery red locks cascading down her back, her hair danced in the sunlight, displaying hues of crimson, copper, and gold, as if flames had been artfully woven into the fibers of her hair. But it was her eyes that truly attracted Julian's attention. Gleaming like golden orbs, they possess a depth and brilliance that seemed to reflect the distant sun. Is that all you have to say to me? Her gaze contained a little something. It looked like disappointment and sadness. Perhaps, a little something else. Julian's mouth had just parted open when all of a sudden, the sky, which had previously dyed red, turned a purplish hue, and lightning began to crackle down from the sky. Cracka, cracka, it tore at everything beneath, destroying the buildings and infrastructure with an unstoppable might. In a matter of moments, the clouds ruptured, unveiling the silhouette of a woman. Her vibrant purple hair swayed gracefully through the expanse of the sky, while her piercing gaze, brimming with an overwhelming sense of animosity, fixated upon me. Cracka, cracka, the sky continued to be ravaged by relentless lightning, intensifying the pressure that oppressed every inch of my being. The force was so formidable that Julian could feel it with every inch of his body. Yet, inexplicably, the individual I was presently possessing displayed unwavering stubbornness. Julian's bones cracked, and he started to have a harder time standing still under the pressure. The fight against Leon had consumed a lot of his energy. Yet, as if what he was experiencing meant nothing, he remained standing where he was. So, you're finally here too. His voice carried through the air, reaching the woman with lustrous, purple hair suspended in midair. He wasn't all that familiar with Aoife, but her. He knew her quite well, and seeing how far she had grown and seeing her current strength, he couldn't help but feel something stir within him. The lightning surrounding Evelyn crackled with increased intensity, while her gaze seethed with amplified hatred. However, she remained immobile, as if she couldn't move at all. That was when Julian's lips curled, and the world underwent another change. From red to purple, to black. Abruptly, darkness engulfed his sight, causing the distant city to vanish entirely. The sky dissipated, and everything in my surroundings vanished, leaving only the two women ahead of him. Domain. Emerging from the depths of the inky abyss, a figure took shape in the distance. Her eyes, a vivid shade of crimson, radiated with an intense luminosity that pierced through the darkness, unveiling a cascade of snowy white hair flowing down her shoulders. She too looked at him with nothing but hatred. Feeling all the hatred directed his way, Julian felt his chest stir, not from fear but from excitement. They sure must have relied on you quite a lot for them to look at me like this. It was amusing to some extent, seeing how much they seemed to care about the person that had taken over his body. His chest stirred further. It almost made him want to destroy everything that he had built up. As such, how long has it been since we've last been together? His mouth parted, his voice coming out clean and crisp. It sounded oddly calm despite the situation he was in. None of the girls spoke. They just stared at him with the same expressions on their faces. Julian's lips curled further. I like those expressions. The more they acted like this, the more joy he felt. Soon, his hand reached forward all of a sudden, and the black chalice from before materialized in his hands. Feeling its coarse texture, he took a deep breath. He hadn't originally planned on consuming the liquid until later, but given the current situation, he had no choice but to do so. It'd be the only way for him to get out of the situation. Rumble, rumble. The appearance of the chalice seemed to have triggered something as the world suddenly started to quake fiercely. The girl's expressions changed dramatically, and the pressure that bore down on him intensified. Yet, despite it all, Julian remained where he was. Stop. Aoife, Evelyn, and Kira didn't know exactly what was going on, but from the wild fluctuations coming from the chalice, they understood that it was an artifact of extreme value. They couldn't allow him to consume whatever was inside. Fuck, stop this bastard. Strings of curses flew his way, but the only response was a slight raise of the cup. No. As the chalice approached his lips, his reflection stared back at him. Rumble, rumble. The world around him seemed to completely crumble. Before Julian knew it, the three girls were already upon him. Coming from all sides, their power sent shivers down his spine. But despite it all, he remained where he was, feeling a slight curl at the end of my lips as the chalice drew to his mouth and he took a sip. But just as the initial drops of the liquid touched his lips, PFTTT. Quote, exclamation mark question mark quote. A sharp pain invaded his mind, forcing him into a freezing halt. Julian's hand grew numb as his head slowly lowered. It was there that he caught sight of a certain sword. It passed right through his chest. Drip, drip. Red stained the top of the sword, dropping in faint droplets as blood seeped out from the corner of Julian's mouth. Slowly, my head turned, and it was there that he caught a glimpse of two dull gray eyes staring back at him. Right, I forgot about you. There was no way Leon would die so easily. Ha ha. A strained laugh escaped Julian's lips. Despite the situation he was in, he didn't panic. He had already drunk the contents of the liquid. He was sure that whatever injury he had sustained, it would heal immediately. But, it was in that moment that Julian realized something. Leon, he wasn't staring at him. He was staring elsewhere. Not only that, but looking around, he could feel the world around him had come to a sudden standstill. Wah, don't worry, I'll make sure to make it quick. Leon's voice echoed quietly within the silence that suddenly took over. Unlike before, Leon felt it. Bah, thump, the loud beat of his own heart. He felt a terrifying premonition, and as he slowly turned his head, his expression changed as a certain figure appeared to stand behind him, watching the two of them. Chapter 779, The Last Angle 2. 3 years ago, within a certain room. I should be gone for at least a year. I don't know how long, but I hope it won't be too long. I sat in silence within a certain room, a knife in my hand. I pressed the knife onto my skin and slowly began to slice as a sharp pain invaded my mind. I ignored the pain and took out a small vial, collecting all of the blood that was leaking out. This should be just enough. I'll give this to Leon later. This blood was going to be very important for me later in the future. But this wasn't over. Tapping onto my ring, a certain item appeared before my very eyes. It was a metallic block that I hadn't seen in a very long time. I can't believe I'm seeing this thing again. It was my old phone. The one that I had previously found within the mirror. I still had it with me. Back then, I had assumed that the only reason I had been given the phone was because of the video contained within it. However, it became very obvious to me that it wasn't the case. The real reason was something else. It was, for this very moment, I muttered under my breath, holding on to the old block before turning my attention towards my arm, where a 4-leaf clover appeared. Right, as expected, I had foreseen something like this happening from the start. No, it's more accurate to say that everything was going according to what I had previously seen. Perhaps there were a few deviations from the vision, but everything is still flowing accordingly. I also came to realize something else. The 3rd leaf. It didn't quite make me travel to the past. At least, not my body. What it did was send my soul to the past. However, whatever damage my soul would sustain would be reflected on my body. The 3rd leaf was also the key to everything. That, and the 4th leaf. Quote ellipsis dot dot quote. Sitting in silence while staring at the phone, I clenched it tightly before eventually turning my attention towards the tattoo and pressing into the 3rd leaf. The surroundings grew silent right after that as nothing happened. I sat in silence, waiting for something to happen, but even as the seconds ticked, nothing of the sort occurred. How cruel. A bitter smile formed on my lips. This wasn't surprising. The 3rd leaf always had its own timing, and I knew that it was waiting for that timing. In the end, the only thing I could do was take a deep and steady breath. Forcing myself to calm down, my gaze lingered on my arm, the faint sting still present before shifting my attention towards the knife next to me. The blood still stained its sharp end as the cut on my arm slowly began to heal. I leaned back on the chair, feeling the lingering pain at the back of my head. I wasn't doing this because I wanted to. This step was something that I had to do. It was necessary. It should be recovered enough. Swiping my hand and putting everything away, I stood up, staggering a couple of steps before collecting myself. While I hadn't taken a lot of blood, the blood I had collected was of great importance, causing me to be in this state. Turning towards the nearest mirror, I looked at my own reflection and paused. I look like shit. With my hair plastered to my forehead and my complexion unusually pale, I looked dreadful. It looked like I had just recovered from a high fever. I smelled myself. Thankfully, I don't smell. It was important that I didn't smell on this occasion. I wasn't were. Are you ready? Torrens' soft words whispered in the air, bringing chills down my entire body as I froze on the spot. My lips trembled, and for a moment, I wanted to shake my head. However, I knew that this wasn't something that I could avoid. I was simply too weak. I couldn't escape him even if I wanted to. But at the same time, I had foreseen this before. I knew it was coming, and I had prepared for it. This was why, as I closed my eyes, I found myself mumbling the words, "Are you sure you want to do this?" Me, sure. His tone almost sounded mocking as he spoke. Why wouldn't I be sure? You should know very well that I must do this in order to accomplish my goal. No, I'm not talking about that. My face started to relax as I looked at him, my voice growing colder at the same time. Although I wasn't sure, it almost felt as though a certain figure had appeared beside me, pressing his hand onto my shoulder as I spoke his direct words. There's nothing that can escape my grasp. A few memories flashed across my mind, from the blood leaking from my arm, to the 3rd leaf. I've seen and witnessed everything there is to witness. When I ask if you're sure you want to do this, what I'm really asking is whether you've considered if this was something that I had planned and it'd be. I stopped right at the end of my sentence as something within me started to stir. In that moment, I felt it. The effects of the leaf. They were beginning. In the end, I smiled and laughed. Never mind. Regardless of what you do, you'll always dance inside the palm of my hand. Do what you wish, all. I never had the chance to finish my sentence. A hand pressed against my face moments later and my vision turned black right after. It seemed like it was all over. But, the moment the darkness faded and light spilled into my vision, an all too familiar room appeared before my very eyes. Don't worry, I'll make sure to make it quick. A voice I was all too accustomed to hearing drifted into the air. I slowly lifted my head, settling my gaze towards the TV screen that stood opposite the sofa where a figure sat. This is the last step, right? The last step before my hell is finally over. How many times had I seen this scene in the past? I had practically lost count. It almost felt as if I could recite every word by heart. But that wasn't what was important to me as I stared at the sofa in front of me. Although it was faced against me, I could sense the presence that lingered within it. It was frail and weak. I didn't show myself and just waited in silence. Eventually, a voice broke through the silence. So what do you think? My chest trembled at the sight of Noel. He was young, so much younger than the last time I saw him, and for a moment, I nearly wanted to expose myself to him. No, I can't. Perhaps he had already noticed my presence, or perhaps not, but I chose to remain invisible. Not bad, just that. What do you want me to say? I mean, you can lie. And why would I do that? Because it's my favorite game. Right. A smile marred my lips as I stared at the interaction, my chest aching at the sight, knowing that this was probably going to be the start of everything. Hell. Be bitter. Cough. Cough. Brother. Everything proceeded as I remembered. Many times, I wanted to act, to move, but I restrained myself, holding myself back as a certain numbness settled at the back of my mind. Eventually, the inevitable goodbye with Noel came. I'll see you soon, okay? Okay. A weak voice followed. Good. Noel smiled, his gaze falling on the presence within the figure in the sofa before turning his attention towards me. The surroundings froze for a moment, until, clank, the door closed, and silence filtered across the room. Quote. It was a silence that seemed to last an eternity until a certain voice shattered that fragile silence. What are you waiting for? My chest stirred in that moment, my throat tightening as I finally unveiled myself from the illusion and stepped forward, stopping next to the sofa and staring at the haggard-looking figure. Although I was already aware of the state that I had been in before passing away, staring at my disheveled, almost dying figure, something within me stirred. I didn't take my future self to be this emotional. The frail voice from my past self echoed. Looking down at him, I opened my mouth and soon smiled. I guess it means that I'm now closer than ever to becoming the eighth god. Right. A weak smile formed on my former self as he looked at me. The two of us paused before my former self lowered his gaze, focusing his attention on a certain box next to the sofa. I didn't need him to tell me what to do as I lowered my body and opened the box on the floor, revealing a long black sword. A tremendous pressure pressed down on the room shortly after as I felt my old gaze on me. You know what that is, right? Yes. The extractor of containment. The sword that had been with me from the very start. Do it. My hands stirred, but I calmed myself down and held onto the sword before turning my attention towards my old self. I could see the light slipping away from him, and I knew that I didn't have much time left. Without wasting time, I moved behind him and mumbled, "Are you ready?" Of course. I channeled my mana into the sword. The pressure intensified, and just as I was about to act, his voice echoed again. Before you do it, can I ask you something? I paused, turning my attention towards my old self. What is it? And nothing much. Cough. Blood spilled from his mouth as he strained to speak. I just wanted to know. In the future, he bit his lips, his face quivering. Are we happy? My body froze, my mind blanking at the same time. For a moment, I didn't know how to respond, the suddenness of the question exploding in my mind. However, I didn't remain like that for long. After a brief moment of silence, I smiled. Are we happy? It was a laughable question when I thought about how I was in the past. The answer was obvious. Yes. Despite the pain, and everything. We are happy. I was happy. Good. A smile lingered on his face as I didn't drag things any longer and stabbed the sword right behind the sofa and onto his chest. Spurt. Blood leaked everywhere as his eyes widened in shock. At the same time, I carefully controlled the mana inside the sword. The sword was called the extractor of containment for a reason. Because it was designed to specifically collect the soul of anyone it stabbed. Spurt. Pulling the sword back, a faint glow manifested over it as my old body limped onto the side of the sofa, breathless. I felt weak at the sight, my mana drained considerably. It's not over yet. I turned my attention towards my arm. Or more specifically, the fourth leaf. There was still a lot that I needed to do. I pressed on it shortly after, holding onto the sword while waiting for my surroundings to change. I could feel the blood within me stir as the leaf activated. But just as I was about to move, the door of the room opened and a figure came in. Clank. The moment he did, our gazes met as his eyes stopped on my corpse. His expression cracked for a moment before collecting itself as he looked at me. Here. He tossed me something shortly after, and I caught it. Make sure to take care of yourself. His next words came out shaking, but staring at him and seeing the thin smile on his face, I pursed my lips before nodding. I will. A genuine smile appeared on Noel's face. Take care of yourself, brother. I nodded back, and the surroundings changed once more. This time, a strong smell of dust entered my nostrils as a faint warmth spread over my body. A large white sun hung in the distance while the world was covered in gray. Rumble, rumble. The world shook in the distance as I turned my attention towards the familiar sight. The fourth leaf worked. I stepped forward, only to stop the moment I turned my head. It was there that I caught sight of two figures, both staring at me. A little girl, and me. A younger version of me. Chapter 780, The Last Angle 3. I remembered this scene. In fact, I had almost memorized it in my mind. How could I forget this scene? This scene, it was one that I had seen back during the summit. Back then, I had been extremely confused, surprised, and even lost. I didn't understand anything at all, and I just felt so helpless. But now, I see. It all makes sense. I stared at the little girl, or more precisely, Cithras, and the younger version of me that stood beside her. He looked at me in shock, his mouth opening wide. Was this how I looked back then? I looked stupid. The thought almost made me chuckle. But that wasn't important as I turned my attention towards Cithras as he stared at me in amusement. He smiled, alternating her gaze between the two of us. He. His eyes seemed filled with delight. Quote ellipsis dot. You really do have a hand in everything, Oricleus. I focused my entire gaze on him, his form looking like that of Teresa. It was odd to see him this way, but if there was one thing that I could see, it was that the Cithras before me was no threat. It looks like he can't use his powers in the vision. This made sense as my lips parted. You've overstayed your stay. It's time you leave. You think. Yes. I couldn't allow him to watch this scene any further. This wasn't something he was supposed to see. That sucks, but I guess that's fine. I've seen and learned enough. Whatever you're trying to meddle with, it's not going to stop me. You've grown weaker, and I. With a wave of my hand, the little girl froze. Clenching my fist, her form dissolved into the air, vanishing without a trace. She hadn't even had the chance to fight back. I didn't give him that option. The surroundings fell silent for a brief moment. But soon, I turned my attention towards my past self. Quote ellipsis dot dot quote. My eyes narrowed at the sight of him. He's weak. This was around the time of the summit. I could more or less recall my general strength back then. I guess he's around the 4th tier, working to reach the 5th. I was still not strong. However, the gap between the me of back then and the current me was wide. It made me realize just how far I had gone. A certain voice broke me out of my thoughts as I looked at the younger version of myself. I could see the confusion in his gaze as he looked at me, and as I thought back to the memories of back then, I opened my mouth. I am indeed you. This much I could say. This is indeed the future. One that I had just come to myself. And what you're feeling is real. I blinked my eyes slowly, focusing my entire gaze on the younger version of me. It was important that he took note of everything. Don't take your eyes away from me. It'll be your turn soon enough. His confusion only grew, but I left things there. This was all I remembered saying, and I also knew that I didn't have the time to speak any longer. There were things that I needed to do. Wait, a voice called out, but I didn't reply. Instead, I fixed my attention on another figure, a frail-looking one as I appeared before them. I can't do it. I can't. Leon's soft cries echoed quietly within the surroundings. He sat on his knees, staring at his trembling hands with a pale face. He looked to be in a sorry state, unable to go through with his actions. 2 swords sat next to him, and my gaze fixed on a particular one as I picked it up. This should be the one that I gave to him before I left. I could still recall that moment. With this sword in hand, it meant that I technically had 2 of the same sword with me. However, unlike the one that I currently had, this one wasn't meant for me to keep. Still, I put it away for the moment. What is he so hesitant about? I couldn't really understand why Leon was acting the way that he was. He looked extremely fragile. His hair was a disheveled mess, and his face was extremely pale. Just what had happened in the time that I had been gone? And how long had I been gone for? Looking around, in particular the dark dome where I could feel the presence of the girls, alongside the real Julian, I fixed my gaze back towards Leon. Something stirred within me as I spoke. Raise your head. My voice came out colder than I intended. The moment I did, Leon's entire body froze as he slowly lifted his head to look at me. In that moment, the world grew silent as the two of us stared at each other. Why you? Leon's eyes shook. At a glance, I could tell that he knew that I was coming. However, something about him was wrong. Snap out of it. I moved forward and grabbed his face with both hands, startling him. What are you doing? I ignored his cries and spoke. Quote ellipsis dot. Don't forget your mission. Injecting emotive magic into my voice layered. I had no choice but to do this. Leon was in no state to act. I clenched my teeth as I spat out the next words. Everything that you've worked so hard for. Don't let it come to waste with this one moment. We've already talked about this. You have to do this. Nah. Leon's breathing started to grow heavier. But you worked hard for this. I cut Leon off before he had the chance to speak, my voice layering further. We had already talked about this. This was the only way for me to come back. Why was he hesitating so much? Was it because he was scared that by killing Julian, I wouldn't come back? Nonsense. I had all of this planned out. He just had to listen. You've reached this point. Don't let everything go due to some sentiment of yours. He's nothing. Ha. Finish what you started. I leaned my head to get a better look at Leon, whose breathing was growing more and more frantic. I pressed my hand onto his shoulder, squeezing as my voice layered further. Don't let a meaningless death stand in our way. Nah. Clank. I looked around and kicked the useless sword on the ground, taking out the sword he had disposed of just moments prior, and handing it back to him. Go. I layered my voice once more. Finish it. Nah. Leon's eyes turned bloodshot, but that was still not ellenough. Not enough to make him fully commit. Do it, I mumbled once more, nudging my head in the direction of the dome. Right where Julian appeared. Quote ellipsis dot. Kill me, I mumbled once more, tuning my emotive magic to the max. Nah. That was all it took for Leon to snap, his hands desperately reaching out for the sword and grabbing it as his eyes grew frantic, adrenaline seemingly coursing through his body. He jumped forward and entered the dark dome where his figure disappeared. Quote ellipsis dot quote. It suddenly grew quiet. Despite this, I could see everything that was happening within the dome. Everything played out as I remembered. And soon, crack, a subtle cracking sound reverberated through the air. Lifting my head, I saw light begin to spill from the black dome, faint at first, then seeping through the widening gaps as it showed signs of shattering. More cracks spread across its surface, weaving like intricate webs that crawled along the curve of the dome, and I watched in silence until... Crash! Everything shattered, revealing the shadows of 5 figures. Thump, Kira, Evelyn, and Aoife all stood in the air while Leon stood behind Julian, who knelt on the ground, a sword stabbing his back. The girls were silent. Leon was silent. I was silent. The world was silent. All eyes were focused on Leon, who stood before Julian, whose back was turned towards me. The chalice was scattered across the ground, spilling the contents within. Leon's expression was different from before, calmer now, colder. It seemed the attack was all it took for him to finally snap out of his fear. Don't worry, I'll make sure to make it quick. His voice gently echoed throughout, almost reassuringly, as the world came to a stop. Aoife, Kira, and Evelyn, they all seemed oblivious to my presence as they stood completely still, their expressions and bodies frozen in time as they all stared at Leon. This is the last step, right? The last step before my hell is finally over. Leon mumbled the same lines I had heard over and over again. So much so that I had grown to memorize them as I nodded slowly. It is. But this wasn't just his hell. It was mine too. What are you waiting for? You've already completed the hardest part. Leon clutched his shirt, slowly wrinkling it as his face trembled. Ha! A hazy smile appeared on his face. I'll do it. He lowered his head to look at Julian. A change stirred the moment he spoke. Julian, still kneeling on the ground, suddenly lifted his head, his eyes locking onto Leon's, and Leon's face trembled. A flicker of hesitation appeared in his gaze. I frowned at the sight, cutting through his hesitation. Stop dragging this out. The words were enough to make him snap out of it. Ah, yes, I shouldn't drag this out. Leon lifted his hand, unveiling the cold gleam of the sword. His lackluster gray eyes quivered ever so slightly as the blade descended in one fluid motion. Shiling. I've waited far too long for this. A head rolled shortly after, stopping beneath my feet as I picked it up. Blood dripped down from the head's severed neck, but as I stared at it, I didn't feel anything. I felt completely numb to it as I turned my attention towards the distance. Towards a peeking figure. His body froze as I turned my attention back towards the head. You'll understand soon enough. Things weren't over yet. There was still one more thing that I needed to do. I cast my gaze on the third leaf while speaking. Quote ellipsis dot. All you have to do is remember. My finger pressed down on it. Remember everything that happened. The world before me changed. I appeared before a certain room where a large desk stood, dominating the space with its gleaming, well-polished wooden surface. Upon it rested a vintage night lamp, its soft glow casting a subdued, eerie light across the room. This room, I was quite familiar with it. This was the first memory that I had from the time that I appeared in this world. It was where everything started, and as I stared at the figure that was sitting before the desk, completely oblivious to my appearance, I extended my hand to retrieve a certain sword. This was the sword that was meant to be in my possession and the one that I had to use. Within this sword, a certain soul existed. One that I had extracted not long ago. I took a deep breath, staring at the figure that had yet to notice me before stabbing the sword forward towards Julian's exposed back. Spurt. That was also the moment I transferred my old soul into the body. This was also the moment that marked the start of my transmigration. For those confused, the reference chapters are Chapter 2, The First Vision, Chapters 355 to 356, A Different Angle,